You mentioned in SMV's brief that high geographic concentration of supply chain should be addressed by diversification. Could you elaborate on how this could be done?
We try to differentiate between these structural features that we cannot change and others that can be changed. And you're also right that high geographic concentration, being a consequence of a transnational value chain with a very, very high division of labor, is something that can be changed. But I think that there are at least two things you need to consider, or you need to say in limitation to that, because first, there are reasons for this high geographic concentration. Just to name a few, there are governments that decided decades ago to strategically invest in semiconductors. And also there are companies that changed their business model through the decades by outsourcing labor-intensive processes, especially the last production step, the so-called back-end manufacturing, where chips are assembled, packaged, and tested. So while this high geographic concentration, and you are right, this really increases the risk of supply chain disruptions in the event of natural disasters or lockdowns, but it's also the key of this highly effective and innovative value chain. So in conclusion to this, a diversification of certain process steps isn't something you can achieve in the short term. As you already said, it's the same with building a fab. You need to keep in mind that because of the high division of labor, high innovation, and also the cost effectiveness in this very transnational value chain, strong collaboration between companies is based on years of teamwork, especially between design and fabrication. So this in turn leads to customers being very reliant on single or limited sources. They really trust in these sources because they are based on very intense collaboration. So if you try to diversify this, it would at least in the beginning be at the expense of the value chain's effectiveness and also of the high level of innovation. Governments are just in very early stages to think about what their role could be and what they can do. So what you see, especially in the US, but also within the EU, is subsidizing fabs, that you try to relocate, for example, manufacturing closer within your region so that you are closer to production, or that you are more sure about the sources you have. But private companies were working on this for the last decades and they know the drill. They have the experience and it worked out pretty well the last decades. And it's not that easy for governments to intervene in a very effective way because they have less knowledge about the dynamics of the semiconductor value chain.
On that note, I believe there's an SMV report discussing why Europe should focus more on chip designing than manufacturing. Could you explain why fabless is more crucial for Europe?
In April, my colleague Jan-Peter Kleinhans, he wrote a paper focusing on the question whether there is a business case for a 2-nanometer fab in Europe, because like everyone is talking about fabrication now, and especially about cutting edge fabrication. We were wondering if it makes sense to strengthen manufacturing of modern chips within Europe. As a background, in Europe, we don't have cutting edge fabrication right now. We have some foundries, but they are only working at a mature level, so they produce older chips. The reason why Europe doesn't really have fabless companies is also directed to the lack of semiconductor manufacturing in Europe. And we argued that before investing in semiconductor manufacturing, especially at the cutting edge level, the EU needs to make sure to have substantial demand from European design companies, but these do not exist at the moment. So we argued that it would make sense to invest in chip design beforehand. And it is the case that Europe never really had a stake in chip design. So throughout the last decade, Europe did not decrease its chip design share dramatically, because it never really had a stake, but still lost 2%, which is 50% downtrend, because it fell from 4% in 2010 to 2% in 2022. So as you can see, additionally, because of some mergers and acquisitions, there are very few fabless companies. And the ones we still have, they are also leaving Europe, such as Dialog Semiconductor or Nordic Semiconductors. So it's not a new problem to European policymakers. They simply shifted their focus from design to manufacturing once they realized that they are not able or were not successful to strengthen the European chip design ecosystem. But we say that it doesn't make sense to pursue the goal to strengthen the European chip design ecosystem for like 10 years. And we argue that you need this kind of like a base to be really successful in manufacturing, because you need this demand, or you need to create this demand. And maybe one last thing about that, it's also very interesting or a surprise, because the EU plays little to no role, but it still has a lot of RTOs. So we are very strong in R&D. We have IMEC, we have Serleti and Fraunhofer. So we kind of could be successful in chip design if we really want to. And then afterwards, we are not against manufacturing per se. We just want to make sure that we have the demand to manufacture chips for Europe.